Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. This is Pat. I'm actually doing Patrick. I'm doing a solo episode today. And Kylene's actually off at a conference, and we've got to keep recording episodes because we've got some vacation ahead of us in June. And so I wanted to come on. Actually, before I get too far into this, I just want everybody to know that I have written down the closing to our podcast, the standard closing, so I don't have to guess anymore, and I don't have to panic, and I don't have to skip it. I will just merely read it at the end. So I'm pretty excited about that. So, but one of the things I wanted to do, it's always nice to have Kylene on here. She always brings such some good energy and topic and structure. And I don't necessarily have a lot of structure today. Hopefully, it will be an informative episode. But I want to, I guess, expand on some of the things I've talked about with, like what recovery gives you back. And I want to speak from my own experience. Our son graduated West Point this past Saturday, and it's been a week, and it's given me time to reflect. Obviously, a very emotional event, full of pride, in what he's accomplished and what he's been through in his life and what he's been able to achieve. At the ripe young age of 22, and I bounced that off of the healing journey. So 4 of the 5+ years of recovery, he was at West Point. So watching him grow up and watching him go through it, and I am also a graduate of West Point. So it when you experience something like that as a parent, laid over something that you ended up doing. And reflecting on life and how that showed up for you, it's just interesting. So I wanted to take a little bit of time. Sometimes on this podcast we're hard on the addicts, and rightfully so. At times, I think there's a the sooner we take responsibility, the sooner we call things out for what they are, our healing process starts. And so today may be a little windy, and so if you don't want to spend the next 30 to 40 minutes listening to me yammer on, then you can certainly skip it, and I won't be offended. But if you stick around, hopefully I can offer some insight. And like I said, it's a little bit of an expansion upon what you gain back as you go through recovery. And there have been some moments through this last 5-ish years where I've been amazed and astonished at the gifts that have come from recovery and the way that it has impacted me personally, but also seeing, I think I had an opportunity this week to see that to those around me and to watch what recovery has brought to my relationships, what it's brought to people as they heal, and so I just want to spend a little bit of time sharing that. So, through this, we flew out there on a Wednesday, and he graduated on a Saturday. And West Point graduations are very full of a lot of pomp and circumstance, and they are there's a lot of uniforms and parades and there are people who show up to speak that pretty big deals, and it's hard. It's kind of an austere place to be. It's actually an austere place to visit, and you got to support the cadets as they're trying to get out and out process and everything. But as I sat there and I watched my son graduate, and I was thinking through the 4 years of how he grew, and this is probably no different for any college graduate. How much they grow through that period. Your hope is always as a parent that your kids are growing wiser and more mature and gain perspective I think deep down we want to maintain the relationship with them. We want to improve the relationship with them. When they move from a kid to an adult, it's at that moment you get to transition to being a friend. And but they always need you as a parent, but you spend more time maybe in the friend zone, right? And so, but seeing him, go through this process and how tiny he was physically, and how as an 18-year-old showing up and being put through something hard, and thinking about how he grew, and he struggled emotionally. He struggled physically, never struggled academically. He was pretty locked in the whole time. But one of the things that because of the resources that we were introduced to through our healing process, therapists and ways to communicate and ways to talk. When he did encounter some difficult emotional times, we were able to bring, many more resources to bear. And so I was thinking about, as I was sitting there in the stands and thinking about him graduating, and I was like, wow, we at the critical moments, you always want to apply the maximum pressure and the maximum resources at the moment where it needs it to. And I'm so thankful, because had I not gone through this healing process, had I not been introduced to the resources that I was introduced to, number one, I wouldn't have been able to get him those resources. But I don't think Kylene and I would have been able to talk to him in the way that we did. We didn't, and we both grew up in houses where our families loved us, but there were some, authority type things, and you have to balance that. You have to, bring healing resources to bear, and as we, obviously as a parent, you stay up and you worry about your kids, and you hope they're going to be okay. But beyond hope, we were able to bring resources to bear that he, to his credit, took advantage of. And he listened, and he grew, and he grew into emotional health. And so, the thing is, and I'm not naive enough to think that it was just us that helped him. I mean, he had good friends. He's got a good girlfriend, and all these people are part of his support network. But I just know that, that I compare it to my parents who loved me very much and wanted what was best for me, like all of us do for our kids. But, they just weren't equipped the way I was to manage that. The other thing that was really neat was, the relationship that we have with him. He wanted us there. He wanted us around. He said some incredibly kind things. One of the humble honors that we had the chance to do is when you graduate from West Point, you get promoted to a second lieutenant in the Army. And Kylene and I had the opportunity to pin those second lieutenant bars onto him. And it's when somebody asks you to do that, it's kind of a big deal. And you can argue that hey, it's just a natural thing, but or it's obligatory to ask your parents, but not really. You know what I mean? So he continued to seek out relationship with us, and he wanted us there, and he wanted us to be part of that. And through this moment, as we enjoyed it, and just were filled with so much pride. Kylene and I found ourselves tearing up a lot. There was a graduation parade on Friday, and then a dinner on Friday night, and then of course the graduation on Saturday. But there were so many moments where we would tear up, and then I just found it was really neat, because we had a chance to to hold each other and to be there for each other, and just seeing the happiness in Keegan and the confidence in Keegan, and seeing the happiness in Kylene and her her desire to kind of seek me out and to connect physically, and I mean through physical touch. And so just, we were there for each other. It was just really, really nice, and to connect deeply, as a family. one of the traditions when you get promoted to second lieutenant is you give a silver dollar to the first person who salutes you. And so in my case, when I graduated in 93, my two brothers, one was in the Navy and one, actually at the time, he was in the Coast Guard, and one was in the Marine Corps, and they were enlisted, and they were my first salute. And through this process, Keegan asked if they could be his first salute again. And so they showed up, and we were able to do it. And the whole family was just there. It was just a really wonderful time. And he was able to give them a silver dollar, much like I had given them a silver dollar 33 years ago. It's just, so there was so much deep meaning to what he did. He's careful, he's thoughtful, he's reflective, he's kind, he recognizes people, and so it was just there was so much that was just right about it. Kylene's parents were there, his girlfriend was there, my brothers and their families were there. I had a good friend from my company, and so it was really nice to have those kinds of people. I for whatever reason, and it was probably part of my wounding, but I remember when even though I was at West Point, and it's where I've met some of my deepest, closest friends to this day. And I look back on that experience as a cadet, and it was fun, and it was hard, and it built character, and it did a lot of things. But I remember there being many, many days at West Point where I was filled with some sadness. And I don't really know what that was. Maybe that was just, part of the things that were happening in my life. But what I would notice, how these patterns come back is when I would go to visit Keegan, and let's say I'd be running on the campus, or I'd be walking around after I dropped him off or whatever, I'd still have that sadness. And, that was like, it was like year two-ish into my, recovery. And I kept processing. I kept, trying to work through that. Like, why is this sadness here? Like this place that it's given me so many opportunities and opened so many doors for me. But I just kept searching it out, kept, digging into it and digging into it and digging into it. And what I noticed, this past weekend when we were there is the sadness was gone. And so it was a really eye-opening thing, because we had done the work. We had really gone through that and worked hard, and Keegan helped me and I helped Keegan, and Kylene, excuse me, Kylene helped me and I helped Kylene, and I worked on my own stuff and tried to take responsibility where I could, and kept going, and reflected back on some of the poor choices that you make when you're a kid, and we obviously want to have perspective because you're still a kid, but there were things I wasn't proud of, and so being able to kind of reconcile that, and I as I sat there in the stadium, I was thinking through a couple things. There's one of the motto of West Point is duty, honor, country, right? And so if you think about it, it makes sense. It's all the kids go into the Army. Honor is a huge part of what you do. The honor code is significant while you're there. You spend a lot of time doing it, and of course doing your duty. And I remember after discovery, I really felt like I hadn't lived into that ideal, and it filled me with incredible guilt. And one of the things that I lost one of my classmates in an aircraft shoot down in Afghanistan. He was a helicopter pilot. He was a good friend of mine, and I always wore a bracelet on my hand that honored him. And right after discovery, I took it off because I felt like I didn't honor him anymore, and I felt like I hadn't lived up to what he had sacrificed his life for. And people can go, oh, come on, but it was very important to me to take that off until such point that I felt I could put it back on again and start to live more into the ideals. It's like, they always say that when people go early, that, you got to make sure that you live life fully to honor them, because they can't, right? And so it was about a year into recovery that I put the bracelet back on, and I still wear it to this day. And as I was sitting there in the stadium, I looked down, and duty, honor, country is all over the place. As I was reflecting, and I was like, what I've been able to live into is integrity now. So I'm able to, I am what I am, and I make good decisions, and I don't always get things right relationally. I had a little bit of a difficult time this week, but I seek repair. I reflect. I think it through, and I'm actually going to have the opportunity in August to go back and speak to cadets about the dangers of pornography and compulsive sexual behavior. And man, I tell you what about coming full circle there? You know what I mean? Being the graduate that makes bad choices and almost blows up his life and everything, to being able to come back and give back and maybe teach some kids at 18 to 22 and help put them on a different trajectory. And I think that's a gift. And so there's so much that I've covered, and once again, if it's rambling, but I think if I can summarize that brief point there is, and I've said this before, none of this was supposed to happen this way. It was supposed to be that in my shame that Keegan would not want to talk to me anymore based on what I had done, and Kylene, would have moved on, and I'd be alone, and none of that happened. So over this 3 to 4 to 5 days, you've got a kid that seeks out relationship, and he's desiring to spend time with me, and Kylene and I spent those days deeply connected with each other, and then my relationship to just 3 simple words of duty, honor, country took on so much more meaning, and as I recovery's not easy. There's going to be times you're not going to get it right, and you're gonna blow up sometimes when you shouldn't blow up, and you're gonna not handle things right, and there'll be times where you'll take responsibility 59 days in a row, and then you'll get to day 60 and you won't, and that's just life. I mean, that's just the way that goes, and the whole point there is pick yourself back up, get back on the train, and get going, and don't quit, because I think what happens is guys will end up quitting, and they'll give up on relationship, or they'll give up on the healing activity, or they'll say things like group is not for me, or they'll put up obstacles to healing, and because it's hard, and it is hard, and there's no two ways about it. The healing process is a really, really hard thing, and so I think don't be afraid to confront that and to get into it. I did want to, as we're talking through this, I have actually been reading a book too that I just finished today called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, by a gentleman by the name of Peter Scazzaro. And it's a really, really good book. And I wanted to kind of talk about a few things that are in here. But one of the I've said this before, is you want to decouple your healing journey from the status of your relationship, or the status of your relationships. I guess I'd like to go a little bit further and say, not only is it the status of your relationship, but the reaction of the people you are in relationship to. And so, man, is it nice to get praise? Is it nice to be recognized for the recovery work you're doing? Yeah. And I think it's perfectly fine to want that. But if, what's your reaction if you don't get it? Does it stop your healing? Do you pout? Do you score keep? And these are all things that can come up in our lives, right? And occasionally they still do. Even the most healed of us occasionally will be like, oh my gosh, nobody recognizes how hard I'm working. And the question I would always put back at you is, what kind of activity in your life, or what kind of healing activity in your life would it take for you to not care what other people thought of your activity, or to just find a way to move towards healing because it's the right thing to do and it's best for you? And that's that's the thing where you want to be. But out of this book, I was going through it today, and this talks about the tagline on the front of the book is, it's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. And Emotional intelligence is something that we want to gain. We want to continue to grow it. A lot of organizations look for that in their leaders, and they try to grow that in their leaders, and they coach it. And I do it at work as well. I coach it. I develop it. I try to develop it. I offer up suggestions and reading and learning and things like that for people, because I think it really is. It really is a wise thing to do. The dichotomy for me is I was really seeking it hard at work, but I wasn't, this is before discovery, but I wasn't engaging much in it in my own personal life. So once the personal life blew up, and I was forced into learning how to be more emotionally intelligent as I worked through my recovery, oddly enough, it showed up at work, and it started helping out at work. So, there you go. For those of you who are going through this healing activity, the healing activity is not just something that's going to heal your marriage. It may or it may not, because you're relying on other people, but it will make you more in tune. And the healing activity that you go through is going to allow you to move through life easier, because work is hard. Work is a difficult thing to manage, and everybody's job can be difficult. There are always maybe the boss that's not as supportive as you need to be, or the coworker that talks behind your back, or maybe the coworker that talks about you to your face. These are all things that are going to happen to you. So you get to make a choice on how you react, and the choices become easier as you move through healing. So I wanted to read just a couple things out of this book, because I think they're really helpful. So the first, actually, oddly enough, is a quote from Dan Allender and Tremper Longman from one of their books, in The Cry of the Soul. So the book is, or the quote is interesting. So, ignoring our emotions is turning our back on reality. Listening to our emotions ushers us into reality. And reality is where we meet God. Emotions are the language of the soul. They are the cry that gives the heart a voice. However, we often turn a deaf ear through emotional denial, distortion, or disengagement. We strain out anything disturbing in order to gain tenuous control of our inner world. We are frightened and ashamed of what leaks into our consciousness. In neglecting our intense emotions, we are false to ourselves and lose a wonderful opportunity to know God. We forget that change comes through brutal honesty and vulnerability before God. So, when we do things like, people go, oh gosh, why do I got to work on the faster scale every day? Why do I got to work on that? Why is that important? Well, it's important because we're trying to identify our emotions, because we have spent years denying them. We have spent years discouraging or disengaging from them. If you think about that, however, we often turn a deaf ear through emotional denial, distortion, or disengagement. We strain out anything disturbing in order to gain tenuous control of our inner world. So we think, or in our stunted, baby adolescent way of thinking, we think that the demonstration of emotion in any form is, we're going to control it. Sometimes, that means that we try to control other people. Sometimes it shows up as anger, because that's when, like, we've held it, and all of a sudden we explode, right? And so, the healing process and the years of faster scales, and the years of checking in with groups, and the years of maybe even checking in with your spouse. Some of you may engage in contact with your spouse, where you have a scheduled check-in, and you say, how'd you do this week? Well, I wasn't feeling good. Kylene is awesome. She knows me, and knows when I'm regulated, and knows when I'm emotionally calm. And we had a little bit of an interaction this week, and I didn't handle it very well. And I had to really, now here's the good news. I didn't handle it very well, but what I did was I got deep into my faster scale, and I really tried to determine why that particular instance bothered me the way it was. And it allowed me to kind of think through it. And so, whereas maybe, actually not maybe, but definitely in the past, had we had that interaction, I would have probably self-soothed in an inappropriate way. And so now being able to work through it and sit in it and go, man, that comment, just ticked me off, and I'm talking about the T on the faster scale. Like I was, why was I there? What the heck, is going on this week? And, sometimes there's just a lot going on. The graduation season was very emotional and it was very tiring. And we're getting ready to go on vacation on Monday, and there are, and then sometimes, you're just, your guard's down a little bit, and sometimes it happens and it hits you in a way and things like that. So, it was important for me to work through that and to understand why those things hit me. And it took me about a day and a half, and I got there, and I was like, interesting, there it is. And so it also allowed me to say, okay, well, how would I handle that in the future? And so, it's because at the end of the day, like I always think about this, when we're wounded or when we're activated or whatever that is, we ignore the logical, we ignore the stated, we ignore the reality of what's happening in front of us. And so, like, in my case, I started the podcast with this. I have a loving wife who has stood by me through thick and thin. And we've both worked on our wounds and our traumas and moved towards each other and created this podcast and created, coaching and things like that. And so there's nothing that would happen today that would jeopardize that. Nothing whatsoever. I have a son who's emotionally mature and healthy, and he desires relationship with us, and he prioritizes relationship with us, and he's respectful and all these things. But what happened in that moment when I was activated is you start to tell yourself messages. You start to tell, to hear these things that just aren't true. You know what I mean? That just aren't true. So, and we had a chance to, because I had worked through it, we had a chance to kind of talk through some things a little bit. So, one of the other things that comes up in this book, and which I think is really important, I was reading through it a little bit this morning, is it talks about where we are, what are some of the characteristics that show up at our different emotional levels. And so this book kind of talks through what's an emotional infant, an emotional child, an emotional adolescent, and an emotional adult. So I'm going to read some of these out of this book. And just, for you as the recovering addict, take a moment and listen as I'm walking through these things and just kind of think about, okay, where am I at on that? So if you end up getting the book, once again, the book is Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. This is on page 168. So emotional infants are, you look for others to take care of you. You have great difficulty entering into the world of others. You're driven by a need for instant gratification, and you use others as objects to meet your needs. Boy, if that doesn't sound like addiction, then I don't know what does. So that is an emotional infant. An emotional child are content and happy as long as they receive what they want. They unravel quickly from stress, disappointments, and trials. They interpret disagreements as personal offenses, right? And we talked a little bit about that. They're easily hurt. They complain, withdraw, manipulate, take revenge, become sarcastic when they don't get their way. They have great difficulty calmly discussing their needs and wants in a mature, loving way. So that's emotional children. So, right, we're moving up a little bit here. Now, here we are as emotional. This next category is emotional adolescents. Tend to often be defensive. Is that you? Would people describe you as being defensive when you get confronted by something? Are threatened and alarmed by criticism. Keep score of what they give so they can ask for something later in return. Deal with conflict poorly, often blaming, appeasing, going to a third party, pouting, or ignoring the issue entirely. Become preoccupied with themselves. Have great difficulty truly listening to another person's pain, disappointments, or needs. Are critical and judgmental. And so, here's the thing. I was, when I look at this, I was alarmed by criticism this past week. So I behaved like an emotional adolescent. And sometimes we all do that. And so the point, though, is like what you want to do. This is not about being perfect, but this is about moving higher on this scale. The healing work should allow you to grow and develop emotionally. And so then the final piece is an emotional adult. So this is where we all want to end up. Are able to ask for what they need, want, or prefer, clearly, directly, honestly. You recognize, manage, and take responsibility for your own thoughts and feelings. Can, when under stress, state your own beliefs and values without becoming adversarial. You respect others without having to change them. Give people room to make mistakes and not be perfect. Appreciate people for who they are, the good, bad, and ugly, not for what they give back. Accurately assess their own limits, strengths, and weaknesses, and are able to freely discuss them with others. Are deeply in tune with their own emotional world and able to enter into the feelings, needs, and concerns of others without losing themselves. And then finally, have the capacity to resolve conflict maturely and negotiate solutions that consider the perspectives of others. Yeah, I think that last piece is so huge because everybody's going to rupture. Everybody's going to rupture, and no matter the most healed, there's just going to be a moment sometimes when it just hits you wrong and you do it. But how do you repair? How do you go about repairing? How do you do that? And so, what you want to do is you want to have more time in the emotional adult time than you have before. When I look back on my own life, I was an emotional child in so many ways, and then I had some good moments, even when I was in addiction, but there was so much of me that was being fed, by wounds and things like that put me at a lower level. So I highly recommend people pick that up. Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzaro. It's the emotional health is what we're looking for. And I think as I wrap it back around, I think that's what I saw in our family, this past week. And, the recovery work, just once again, to encourage the addict. There's all this stuff about men being the leader in the household and all these different things. And I don't, I'm not a theologian. I'm not going to talk at length about that, but I can speak, and this is where I really want to encourage you. The more emotionally healthy you do, you find your way to be there for your family. And when you can be there for your family and be a good example and help people emotionally, that's leadership. It's not telling people what to do. It's not being the tiebreaker on things. It's none of that stuff. It's being emotionally available and emotionally intelligent and emotionally mature and being there for your family. And I really, really saw this past weekend. And my family means so much to me, and being able to reflect back over 5 years and go, wow, we're still in relationship with each other. And actually, I would say it's not even so much that we're just in relationship with each other. We're thriving, and we're growing. And I wasn't always driving that. There were moments when Keegan picked up the baton and kept the family moving. There were moments when Kylene picked up the baton and kept the family moving. There were moments when I did it, and so we became this group that, yes, it was a great accomplishment for him, but it was really like as I reflect, it was just a culmination of tremendous amounts of work on all three of our parts, and without a doubt, I would have never had this opportunity. I don't think the three of us wouldn't have had this opportunity of connection and love and grace and healing and support and growth and happiness. And I could just keep adding the superlatives to it. But so just keep going. You don't know what the future holds as far as the beauty that is going to come to you. And and I'll even go so far as to say that you richly deserve to. You've been wounded, you've been hurt. Maybe your family didn't teach you how to connect emotionally. Maybe as a little boy you were neglected, or maybe you had some horrific things happen to you. And man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm really, it shouldn't have happened to you, but it did. And now you have an opportunity. If you're listening to this podcast, you have an opportunity to continue to move in the direction of healing. You're not going to always get it right. You're not going to always be able to be in the moment in the most stalwart, emotionally intelligent way. There will be times that you don't get it right, but just keep going, because the amount of beauty that's in front of you. And I think about this at 5 years, 3 to 5 years to heal, right? And I always, and I think a lot of people have thought this, okay, so in 3 to 5 years, I won't ever want to look at pornography again. I mean, I was essentially done looking at pornography and engaging that, I would say, in week 1. Like it was just, I needed help. But what I have gained, through this process of having this weight come off of me, of the impact of things that happened to me, the impact of things I did, the way I had treated people, the way I had been treated, and to be able to be at this point now where life is good. And I'm not going to use the curse word, but Kylene was like, when I first started traveling, she was like, just don't be a jerk, and what she was referring to is don't act out. And it is funny because it's like that's what you get that back, but you end up being solid in that because you are a much more healed person, and you're able to navigate life, experience deep emotions, and process them with families, process them with friends. And whatever that is. So anyway, it's a little bit of a rambling episode, and I recognize that, and that's okay. So, but I hope everyone has a wonderful week. And I guess this is probably the best part of this. So I will leave you all with me reading the closeout statement, so I won't mess it up. And I hope everyone has a great week. Every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. Make that choice today, and we'll see you next week.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.